Everybody's interested in mixing colors. So I'm gonna start with do's and don'ts. So all of these rules, whether I'm demonstrating it traditionally or digitally, it's like the same. It applies to both. It's just that the color wheels are different. So with digital, you're actually using an additive color wheel, whereas with traditional, you're using a subtractive color wheel. So the most common thing that I see is people starting off by using too many colors. What people tend to do is, they buy those big sets of like 48 colors or 72 colors. I see Liquitex makes like a 72 color set. Like, that's overwhelming. And you'll never really be good at mixing colors if you have too many pre-mixed colors, right? So what you want to do is you want to start with just a basic set. You only need 5 to 12 colors. So your 3 primaries plus black and white. And this works with not just paint, it works with all kinds of other mediums. So if you had to supplement, the other colors would be like a brown, and then you could get like a warm and a cool version of each primary. The only yellow that you need is really like a lemon yellow or like a cadmium yellow light. Get the hue, like don't get the real cadmium because cadmium is poisonous. And then I would also get a yellow ochre. In terms of the reds, I would get something like a magenta, which is like a cooler red, and then I would get like a cadmium red light. And then in terms of the blue, I would get ultramarine blue and phthalo blue. So phthalo blue is like closer to green, so it's cooler, and your ultramarine blue is warmer and closer to purple. So you could either get 3 primaries, or you can get 6 of these colors plus black and white and a brown, but you don't need more than that, especially if you want to get really good at mixing colors yourself. So the second most common mistake is don't mix dull colors using bright colors. Sometimes you have to, right? But it's much better to start with your dull colors, like earth tones. If you were to mix a color that was like this olive green, if you were starting off with just your primaries, you would need yellow, then blue, and then you would also add a black. But if you had your earth tones, like let's say you had a yellow ochre, then you don't need to take your cadmium yellow and, make it duller. You can just start off with your duller color. Earth tones are more natural looking and they are cheaper. So if I was to make this green, for example, you can see if I drag this across, this green becomes more saturated. If I dragged that green up and down, you can see it gets lighter and darker. If the green is duller, then you could probably start with black. Because the yellow is so bright, right? That black is just going to tip it towards green. So you can mix this green with different types of mixtures. When you start mixing a color, you want to start by choosing a color that is similar to it. So similar in value or similar in hue. So the next one, this is one that I see a lot. I see a lot of people, they take out a lot of colors, they want to do a portrait, and then the colors are all over the place and they're getting frustrated. And so I always tell my students, if you are having trouble with value, don't start color. If you jump into color without understanding value, it is so frustrating. So value and color are both elements of art, but value trumps color. It may not be true for all cases, okay? So don't take this literally, but in general, value is more important. Let's see if I can pull up some examples. This is a portrait that I painted of John Singer Sargent, one of my heroes. Most of what I used for his face are earth tones. Contrary to that, what I use for the bottom are just like crazy colors, right? Like all kinds of pastels and like weirdly saturated colors and all of that. And this is more of an artistic experiment to explain to my students that if you can figure out the value and prioritize your values, you can get away with any color. Okay, so the next point is don't confuse middle gray as 50% black plus 50% white. So I can't actually do this digitally, but pretend that I'm putting down white here. So I do 50% black and 50% white. Well, what color is that going to get you? If you wanted to get a middle gray like this, chances are you're going to be using like 90% white and like 10% black. The actual ratio is maybe like this. Mixing colors visually is different than mixing colors technically. So why I say this is because different pigments and brands will affect the color quality. So you got to be a little bit more careful with that. It doesn't just apply to middle gray, it also applies to other colors. Okay, so when you're mixing, don't start with darker hues, start with the hue that's closest to the value of the desired color. Let's say you wanted to mix this green, right? Back to this green example. It's better to start with a yellow ochre because the yellow ochre is similar in hue and similar in value, right? And then I would probably add a little bit of blue. So you actually need less if you start with the hue that's closest to the value of the desired color. You can help support our mission to make art education easily accessible for everyone. Become a Wing Canvas member on Patreon or YouTube and get special perks like classes and critiques. All right, the last thing, don't forget context. Look up Chevreul's rule of color. Jessie did a stream to explain Chevreul's rule of color. It's actually really interesting because it's all about color context. But basically, to summarize it, colors will appear differently depending on what's next to it. Let me show you. So these two squares are actually the same gray, but they appear different because of the colors around it. So this gray over here appears warmer overall because it's surrounded by a cool, bright color. Over here, this gray appears cooler and lighter because the color around it is warmer and darker in value. Over here, the purple, this gray can probably pass for like a yellowish gray. Whereas over here, the same gray appears a lot more bluish and purplish because it takes on the properties of the opposite color. And so gray is kind of magical like that. Gray in itself is kind of like a chameleon, right? It turns into, or it appears different depending on what's around it. Now, this is true of most colors, but because gray technically does not have any color, that's why it has those magical properties. So actually mixing your colors on gray, it's actually better than mixing your colors on white. So now let's look at some examples in real life. So you can see this is the same guy, very, very different context. We're just gonna take some samples of his skin tone. Okay, so basically what I'm doing is I'm taking a mid-tone color. So his mid-tone is this like peachy color, right? When we think default skin tone, that's what it is. And then you can see the light parts of his face are maybe slightly more yellow. If I just took this skin tone and then I added white to the skin tone, it's not going to make this color. When you add white to a color, or you add black to a color, it actually cools the color. So white and black are both cool colors. So I would have to warm it up with maybe like a touch of primary yellow. And then the darks, so this is like a relatively warm skin tone palette. Let's look at something that's like really desaturated. So the mid-tone colors on white looks like a bluish gray. You probably never start with this color for a skin tone. And so you'll learn that it's not always what you expect. So tons of drama, very desaturated, monochromatic color palette. So monochromatic is basically just one color and getting lighter and darker. This one over here, let's see what his skin tone is. Look at that, very desaturated. You know, if this was like, if you use this skin tone on a bright sunny day, you're painting a dead person. You're a zombie. You're painting a corpse, right? So it all depends on the context. And then the last one, so you can see this one's a very neutral gray, whereas we have a cool gray and a warm gray. This one is very neutral. So these are different types of palettes that you can use, but we all have a default. This one is very monochromatic, dramatic, desaturated. So if you're going for something very moody, right? This one here is warmer, also fairly monochromatic, but I would say it's warm grays. Okay, so this one here, so this one's very interesting because in this example, you have cools and warms, right? So warm shadows and cool highlights. Okay, usually highlights are warm and shadows are cool. This one is interesting because it's the opposite. So if you know that your background color is going to be cool or warm or bright, you know, those are the things that you want to put in. So starting with your background is another one of those things that can really help you improve. So I was gonna change the skin tone of my little avatar here. So my default is this one. It's me wearing a green shirt, right? So I'm not going to change that one. So let's say the first background is going to be this like bluish color. So if I wanted my skin tone to look more like this color, I would have to adjust this avatar to be more of this blue. I can use a layer on top. This is so easy. This feels like it's cheating. Pretty simple, right? You can pretty much do this for all of them. So for example, for the warm grays, let's try, you know, this cyan background color. So it's like more of a cyan color. Then for my adjustment layer, what I could do is just use an umbery tone, you know, just paint it on. So it's very subtle. It doesn't, I would probably leave the hair because hair is like a black color, right? So it probably will retain some of that blue instead of this umbery color. So then for the last one is probably the trickiest because the lighting is a little bit different. So I would use the blue. And then if I wanted to add bounce light to this, create a new adjustment layer, I can probably put in some of these like bluer tones on one side. It depends on how rendered you really want to get with this. The other side has like warmer shadows, right? So for the warmer shadows, it's cooler than the original, even though it's warmer compared to the blues. So for the ear, you can see how gray that ear actually looks. Typically speaking, I would leave the ear more red. Ears are naturally more transparent, so they appear more red. So like your noses, your nostrils, your fingertips appear more red, right? But like basically this is how I would do it to adjust for color context.
So let me know in the comments below if you've ever made one of these common color mistakes and what colors you have trouble mixing. If you're an art nerd like me, you'll want to check out our entire color theory playlist, which I will link in the description below. It's a treasure chest full of free resources that you won't want to miss. Join a virtual art class in seconds and learn live from Wing Canvas instructors. Enjoy weekly assignments, individual guidance, and real-time feedback on your artwork so you can create like a fearless illustrator. If you learned something new, please like and share this with a fellow art nerd. If you love receiving quality and free arts education, subscribe. Here's a couple other videos you can check out next.